Um, Hello, Madam Miriam. Good evening, ma'am. Can you hear
Good
me, ma'am?
evening. Yeah, I can. Good evening too. How are you?
Good evening. I'm doing well, I'm well. How are you too, ma'am?
I'm doing okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to have you here with us for TBD today. Do you know
Yeah,
what
this is
TBD stands for, ma'am? In full.
not sure. Not
Okay.
really.
TBD is short for theme-based discussion. THEME based discussion. Like we're going to
Okay.
have. Yes. It's lovely to have you with us, ma'am. Thank you for gracing us today.
Yeah,
Okay,
the
so
pleasure is all mine.
good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. If you can hear me, just signify by raising your hand. Use the raise a hand feature on your screen. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So I believe we can all hear me. Welcome to another interesting episode of our theme-based discussion here at Everything Literature. And like always, it's always a special time. But today is extra special because we have our guest speaker with us, and our guest speaker is we have a foreign guest speaker from East Africa, Kenya, Madam Miriam Achiso, and she's here with us to discuss um, inclusive practices in digital language education. This is also a very special TBD episode because it is the first Africa Connect we're going to be having here at Everything Literature Network. So we're glad and graced to have Madam Miriam here with us. Thank you so much for joining once again. Madam Miriam Achiso is a dedicated English language teacher and a postgraduate student in comparative literature. She's passionate about fostering a love for literature and promoting cross-cultural understanding. With a proven track record of exemplary performance as an English literature teacher, she employs a dynamic and inclusive teaching approach that encourages critical thinking, creativity, and intellectual curiosity. Her special interests include comparative literature, creating and organizing book clubs with a focus on cross cultures, analyzing literary texts from diverse perspectives. She also enjoys classic and modern literature. She mostly enjoys books authored by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Maya Angelou, Virginia Woolf, Meja Mwangi, and Chinua Achebe. Madam Miriam Achiso has achieved notable success in creating and managing book clubs and publishing a comprehensive guide that has been utilized in several schools. She's committed to promoting a love for reading and creating a literary community outside of the academic world. She's guided by certain core values, which include resilience, patience, integrity, accountability, empathy, and enthusiasm. Above all, she strives to create a safe and trustworthy learning environment that fosters intellectual growth and development. Madam Miriam, I believe she's ready for us to this evening. And the purpose of tonight's discussion is to, for her to intimate us with the peculiarities of the Kenyan educational system and share it with us, also hear from us here in Nigeria, and just discuss generally. So we're glad to have you here, ma'am. Please feel welcome. My name is Precious Olawale, by the way. Madam Miriam, you can have the floor now.
Actually, I feel privileged to be here with you. It's also my first time to be on such kind of a platform, especially with colleagues that are far off away from my own country. So I am happy, and yes, welcome all of you, and I hope that you're going to have a very interactive session and get into this cultural exchange program. Thank you so much. So, oh yeah, you want to say something, Precious? I see your hand is up.
Yes, I wanted to ask before you continued because I'm not sure if I pronounced the name correctly. So we can all know how to pronounce your name, ma'am. Please, can you?
Okay. You've done it correctly. It is actually a simple one. It is Miriam Achiso.
Okay, thank
Madam
you.
Miriam Achiso. Yeah, sure. Okay, so let me get direct into what we are here for today. So I will start by giving you an overview of our national Kenyan curriculum. So we've had we have two curriculums running the country right now, because one is being phased out and another one is being adapted. So we are yet to phase out the first curriculum, which is called 844, which means 8 years in primary, 4 years in secondary school, and 4 years in university. It's being phased out completely, and the new curriculum that will take over is called CBC, which is short for competency-based curriculum. So this competency-based curriculum is going to have learners start 2 years in ECDE, 6 years primary level, 3 years junior secondary, 3 years senior secondary, and lastly 3 years in tertiary education, that is universities, colleges, and other technical institutions. So the reason why the first curriculum is being phased out is because the policymakers and the stakeholders of education in Kenya, they sat down and they agreed that the 844 system was actually it is still following the colonial guidelines regarding education, and therefore it was more of theoretically based other than practical or skill based. So this competency-based curriculum is coming in to actually emphasize more on the skills other than the theory part of learning. So these learners are actually being encouraged or are being exposed to the practical skills of learning other than the theory part of it. So even when we go into the language itself, we don't really base on teaching the guidelines or rules of language, but we are rather adapting to the communicative approach of teaching, whereby we want these learners, when they finish the whole process of learning from the ECDE to senior secondary, they are able to communicate the languages that they are being taught in schools, in this sense English. So it is more focused on the skills other than the theory part of it. Yes, so that's a short overview of the curriculum. And so what is digital language education? As you all know that, if you have knowledge of it, when you talk about digital learning, we are talking about using technology in learning, in teaching and learning, not only learning, but also teaching and learning. So digital language in this case is use of technology to enhance language learning and communication skills. So we are moving away from the traditional aspects of just using textbooks and maybe teachers, that is teacher talking time, or and adapting other tools into the classroom so that we can enhance the language acquisition skills of these learners. So it includes basic things like digital literacy, using digital technology safely, effectively, and responsibly, because we cannot just have digital tools without the learners and teachers or educators in general knowing how to safely use them. And also it includes digital labs. This is focusing on the basic language learning skills such as listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And then digital textbooks that are created and presented digitally, which can be multimodal and interactive. These digital textbooks are actually dynamic, and they are adaptive in the sense that they can be modified to meet the individual learners' needs, especially even those learners that have learning disabilities and such kind of things. So these tools, once they are made available to our learners, it makes the learning of language a little bit different from the traditional teaching methods or strategies that we used in the past. So according to me, I think that digital learning goes beyond the use of technology in teaching language and encompasses a range of competencies. This includes critical thinking and digital content creation, online communication, and information literacy. You see, once you expose your learners to these digital tools, you should not focus only on them being able to use these tools, or instilling knowledge in them of how to use these tools or how to access information from these tools, but it should also enable these learners to be able to think critically, and they should be able to adapt or acquire other values in for example, let's say teamwork, because we get sometimes these tools, we avail them to learners, and these learners are supposed to use them together, maybe manipulate the tools together as a team, and maybe crack a puzzle or come up with a solution or listen to something and maybe act it out. So it's actually we should focus as educators to ensure that these tools are bringing out these values that are critical to the life skills of these learners, other than just making them know how to use them. So, and also make them to become creative. Let's say, for example, in the teaching of literature, I usually expose these learners to some of these digital tools, maybe to enable them make things like book covers. They make things like trailers of stories that we are reading and such kind of things. So you find out that these learners are actually becoming more creative while exposed to these tools, other than just knowing how to use them and manipulating them in matters, knowledge specifically to the subject that you are teaching. Yes, next slide, please. So inclusive practices in digital language education. As much as we are embracing this digital education and digital language teaching, we should be aware that we have different kinds of learners in our classrooms, and the goal should be that these tools that we are availing to them, or that they are accessing, should actually be inclusive, in the sense that they can be accessed by every learners. They should not be maybe devised in a way that only learners of a specific, maybe let's say social group, or maybe let's say a specific background can access, but it should be inclusive. It should include every learner's need, especially even those who have learning disabilities and such. So to do this, we have universal learning designs, whereby educators create an inclusive learning environment by providing access to educational materials and resources. So this one is done to make the access of these materials and resources learner friendly. So it doesn't matter where you're coming from, it doesn't matter your race, your ethnic background, your social strata and all that. You can be able to access this material, learn from it. And then also these digital materials, the ones that we are choosing, are also supposed to be culturally responsive, in the sense that they are diverse in nature and can actually accommodate all cultural backgrounds, experiences, and identities of students. I am glad to announce that in my class, I also happened to have learners who are coming from West Africa, specifically in Botswana. Is it West or South? I don't know. I'm not sure about that. So we try when we are teaching these things, and even the material that we access to them, they are sensitive even to their own cultural background, in the sense that we don't talk down on any cultural background or on any practices around the world. We just respect every culture as they appear, so that these learners may also not feel injured should there be a specific learner in your class that is coming from a different background. So, and then also to increase participation, these tools are not supposed to make these learners shy away from trying them, because maybe they are so much sophisticated and maybe they fear that they're going to damage the electronic devices and such. They should be made in a way that they can help, they can make these learners increase curiosity and want really to manipulate them, and thus increase their participation in learning. And then they should celebrate diversity. Just as we are in here from different parts of Africa, West and East, we are very sure that even in our classroom themselves, even if it's just Kenya to be specific, Kenya itself is a country that hosts different tribes, and in these different tribes we have generally different cultural practices, identities and traditions and all that. So these ones, and ethnicities, so these tools are supposed to celebrate this, other than maybe just hail one specific ethnic group, or maybe praise one specific religion while looking down upon the rest. So they are made in a way that they are inclusive, in a way that they actually respond to all the values, abilities, genders, races, ethnicities, religions, cultures, ages, and sexual orientations of our learners. Yes. So specifically, digital education in Kenya, I would want to take you through what has been done generally in Kenya to ensure that there is digital language education is being practiced. There is use of digital tools in teaching language in different parts of Kenya, and not only teaching language but also other subjects. So there has been a significant progress in digital language education in recent years. This has been brought about by a number of initiatives and programs that have been placed to improve access to digital learning tools and resources. So we've had digital learning program. This one was launched in 2013 to provide primary schools with digital internet devices and training for teachers to improve digital literacy across the country. This one actually happened when the president that was in charge of the country at that time, one of their manifestos was to improve digital literacy in schools, and they came by with a program to be supplying tablets in schools, whereby the learners were given blue tablets and the educators were given green tablets. These tablets were sophisticated, and they actually were able to help these learners as far as the digital language is concerned, and they were exposed to massive content that they could not get in the traditional textbooks that they used. So this one was also implemented in a way that the teachers themselves, the educators, were taken through rigorous training to help them be able to use these tablets while teaching the students in class. I think this was the first project that ensured that internet connection reached the most remote parts of Kenya, where parents themselves even did not afford smartphones. Majority of them used to use these traditional phones. So even parents were not well familiarized with smartphones. But because of this project, these digital tools in form of tablets enabled these learners to access the internet and therefore be exposed to massive knowledge as far as language is concerned. And then we have digital textbooks that were provided by UNICEF and smartphones that were also provided. We have a program that is called Somanasi. So this one is AI-powered learning tool from Kitabu Africa that tailors education content to each student's learning style and requirements. This one has enabled even to create digital books from different apps that are accessible on the internet. I have one here that I usually use with my students. It doesn't necessarily need the learners to go to the libraries and access the hard copy textbooks, because we may have these learners in the very much remote areas in their villages that they could not even reach towns to go to the libraries and maybe borrow books. But these kinds of apps, such as this one, we have Kindle. This one is for young adult learners. And then we have another one that is called, the name has actually escaped me. We have another one that is for young learners. They can actually access different kinds of books, comical books, story books, even content books. If they would want to learn something about the environment, they just type on they open the app, then they type on the app what information they are looking for, and then the whole information will be displayed on the screen for them to be able to learn. So it has actually enabled learners in the most remote parts of villages in Kenya not to worry about the physical textbooks, which sometimes are very difficult to come by, or even maybe very expensive. Just with little bundles or even the Wi-Fi that have been provided in schools, they can be able to access this content through the laptops the tablets that the government has availed to them, or their teachers' smartphones. And then we have another one, Imlango. Imlango, this one also is in Kenya. It's a comprehensive educational technology program that aims to improve learning outcomes, enrollment, and retention of Kenyan pupils through high-speed satellite and broadcast internet connections to school. So Imlango also came through different organizations, non-governmental organizations, and they enabled different schools, especially those ones in villages, in remote parts, because initially we've been having a distinctive education system in Kenya, whereby the schools that are in urban centers and the schools that are in the remote parts of Kenya are actually having, yes, the same curriculum, national curriculum, but you could notice from the resources that were available that those schools in urban centers were actually availed with much more better resources in terms of even the trained teachers and the material that was available to them as compared to those schools in the remote part areas. So these programs such as Imlango and Somanasi has actually enabled this to bridge this gap, so that the learners in urban centers and those learners in remote parts of the country can actually access the same content without much problem. So yes, these are example of the digital tools that we have. So what about educators? As much as there are these tools that are available, so it is also important that the government has known to keep the educators on track, to ensure that they are having constant training, and they are also being these resources are also being availed to the educators while in training, so that when they come out and maybe join the teaching the schools to teach the learners, they are well versed and well equipped with this digital literacy to be able to pass the same to learners. And we have very many training for educators in Kenya, but I've just sampled these few ones that are very common. Like Scaling Digital Skills Program. This one was funded by Safaricom and Vodafone. Safaricom is our network provider in Kenya, the major network provider in Kenya, to improve digital education in Kenya in teachers training colleges. So this one actually ensured that every teacher training college in Kenya, the teacher training colleges are actually meant to train teachers who are going to teach primary learners. So there is at least one teacher training college in every county in Kenya. You can find those countries that are very big, maybe there are 2 or 3. So in every teacher training college, they availed them with these digital devices, the computer servers, the smartphone projectors, smartboards, among others, so that these educators can be trained well on matters ICT or digital literacy before they come out. And then we have teacher tech training. This is TTTP, triple TP. They call it triple TP. It trains educators on how to use available resources and develop foundational skills. And then now we have our employer. The body that employs teachers in Kenya is called Teachers Service Commission, TSC. So this one is usually in charge of all the subsequent training of educators. We can call it something like the their continuous training while in institutions. So let's say, for example, like right now, as we are having a transition from one curriculum to another, there is need for consistent training for these educators, because most of them were not trained for this curriculum when they were in colleges. They have had to be trained when they are in school. And this competency-based curriculum is a number one advocate for digital literacy. And therefore, the Teachers Service Commission has come up with various sessions to be training these educators in cohorts, so that to equip them with the necessary digital literacy for the sake of the learners. Like right now, across the whole country during this holiday, there is a program that is called CBC retooling, competency-based curriculum retooling for these teachers. So they call it retooling because they were trained initially, but now they are just sharpening them up, because we are going to have the first grade 9 in the country, and these teachers are supposed to go in there while they have the necessary digital literacy to teach these learners. So the Teachers Service Commission is the biggest body that actually avails digital literacy to teachers in Kenya. Next slide, please. So technology in Kenyan classrooms. So what is done in Kenya to ensure that these learners actually have these things is more or less the same just as what happens to teachers. We have the Common Digi School. This one was launched by the Kenyan Ministry of Education in partnership with UNESCO and Huawei. It aims to provide internet connectivity and digital devices to schools across Kenya. So now schools in remote areas have access to the same quality educational resources as those in the cities. Then we have CBC, this one that I'm calling the competency-based curriculum. This one is another one because initially in the 844 system, our previous curriculum that is being phased out sooner, by 2028, we will not have the 844 system. We are going to have only the competency-based curriculum system. So in this competency-based curriculum, these learners are being exposed to digital literacy at a very early age. And unlike most of us who went through the 844 system, we were only exposed to some things like the computers, the desktops, and all that while in high school. But at this rate, in this current curriculum, the competency-based curriculum, learners are being exposed to these digital tools and digital literacy at an early age, as early as the elementary level, that is the baby class to elementary grade 1, 2, and 3. They're exposed to these things at an early age, which means as they scale the heights of education, they will be much more well-versed as compared to the learners of the previous generation. And we have EdTech innovations. This one provides things like Zeraki. These are tools that manage the data of learners in schools. They track their progress, their records, and all that, therefore making data management to be very easy. Unlike in the previous curriculum where teachers and educators had tedious work of working with papers. There was so much files of learners and there was so much paperwork being done, as compared to this age in time whereby all these things are just managed by these computers, and the data of the students is safe and well kept for future retrieval. So yes, as much as there are these things, there are these tools that are available, the government has been working day and night to ensure that digital literacy is cutting across many schools in the country. Definitely, we cannot lack challenges. There are challenges that are here. I think, or to my knowledge, I know that these challenges are equally the same as the challenges that are faced in any other African country, because we are still developing. We are yet to reach the developed countries state. So there are very many schools in the country. There are very many schools. There are other schools where we still have no infrastructure, like even things like electricity is yet to get into the most remote parts of these areas. So even talking about internet connection becomes something else, because even if you cannot access electricity itself, how then can you start talking to people about let's say things like internet connections and affording the laptops and all that. So you find that there are schools that are still suffering lack of infrastructure and financial constraints. These financial constraints comes in especially in matters maintaining these digital devices that have been availed to these schools. Yes, they avail them, but many a times we find out that there are no plans for maintenance. So maybe once these tablets get to the schools, and then maybe they get damaged, they are just stored aside, and that becomes the end of it. There are no plans of how they're going to be maintained, repaired, and such kind of things. So they become a wastage, and you find that these learners are denied an opportunity to use these gadgets because of such kind of lack of plans. Then a lack of enough training. It is expensive to train educators and teachers, to be specific, very expensive, especially if you are doing this when the teachers are already out in the service. It becomes much more easier when this training is done when these teachers are still in colleges. But now that, especially now, we are having a transition in curriculum, and these teachers, most of them were already out in the field. Now getting them back and trying to train them becomes expensive for the government to bear, and you find that sometimes they just do snowballing when they are calling or teachers, those ones who are going to be trained, they randomly picked, and you find that others miss out on the same. And then definitely we have staff resistance, especially we've had a problem in Kenya with this transition thing, because there are teachers who are still sticking on the old curriculum that was available for us. Some of them just refuse to adapt to change, and they, as much as they are trained, as much as they are told this is now what you're supposed to do, you should drop these practices and pick these practices, becomes difficult for them. So you find that there is that resistance, and this one becomes a problem. And then lack of management commitment. There is that excitement, like right now the grade 9 teachers are being retooled or trained on how they're going to use these digital devices. Then there was that initial excitement, but now when it comes to the practical part of it, for them to implement what they have been trained in classrooms, becomes something else. So they end up always going back and getting back to their old practices. So it becomes a problem even to equip these learners with digital literacy. Time management issues. It is imperative to note that there is overpopulation in our public schools in Kenya. So you find out that even when you have these digital devices, they won't be availed as to the standard of the number of learners that we have in classroom. So you may find out that to wait or to accommodate every learner, to ensure that every learner manipulates these tools and gets to learn or gets to get this information or be exposed to this material, becomes difficult because of the massive overpopulation that is there in schools. So you find out that just a few of them get to learn, and the rest, those ones who are not very fast, they get to miss out on it. And then difficulty in adapting different learning styles. You see, it becomes difficult for educators, maybe even themselves, to adapt, because if you have been more exposed, or you are more used to just teacher talking time becoming more than students talking time, you are used to talking and giving instructions, and here now you're supposed to leave these learners with these gadgets to manipulate them on their own and learn on their own. It becomes difficult for you. So you find a teacher tries going around and instructing and telling the learners everything, instead of letting them do it on their own, and therefore makes even the outcome of the lesson not be achieved, because some of these digital tools do not need the old practical styles that we used to in teaching. They need one to adapt, and some people or some educators or trainers or teachers find it difficult to adapt to these different learning styles. There is always a solution for every problem, I believe. So as much as we know these problems exist, it is not the end, or we are not going to throw in the towel and say that now this digital literacy and all this digital language learning is beyond us and there is nothing we can do. Now we are giving up on it. No. I believe that there are solutions, and these solutions actually have to call for all the stakeholders of education, beginning with the learners themselves, the parents, the teachers, the community at large. So if they come and work together as a unit, then it will become easier to really face out much of these challenges that are being faced as far as digital language is concerned. So that is, we update the goals of the digital learning and sharpen the focus on teaching and learning. If this is done, rigorous or constant revising of the goals will make it easier, and also make these stakeholders of education, especially teachers, want to do more and focus on teaching and learning. And then strengthen collaboration with private sector providers as well as consumers. That will help in matters of infrastructure, because if these things have become expensive and the government alone cannot manage it, if they bring in even non-governmental organizations like the Imlango program, that one is purely non-governmental. So if they bring in many of such organizations to help them combat this infrastructure challenge, then it will make it easier for schools around the country to be able to be exposed to this digital literacy. And then prioritize sustainability for digital infrastructure investment, other than just purchasing and giving head teachers and head of institutions these materials or these digital tools. There should also be a plan of how to sustain them so that they don't get worn out, and then the content is provided only for a short period of time, and when the tools get damaged, there is no other way out. So if that is done, then this one is going to be solved. And then development of holistic learning products rather than individual components. So that one is also basically going to be part of the solution of these myriad challenges that we are facing as far as digital literacy is concerned.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Madam Miriam. We're really grateful for that session. Thank you for taking us through the peculiarities of the Kenyan educational systems and curriculum, for the development and the growth and the progress that you're making over there. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for also giving us clear insights, for giving us detailed information on how digital learning operates and works over there. And now I have a few questions here, but I don't know if I'll be able to take all the questions. I'll try to ask if it's one or two, I'll be able to ask. I'll try to ask them. And I'll also give, we'll have about 5 minutes to take questions from the audience, if there are questions. So let me go straight to my question. How can educational institutions in Africa effectively integrate digital learning systems and practices into their curriculum? And now when you were speaking, ma'am, you mentioned the different steps towards progress that Kenya has been making, and it seems like to some extent, even though the country is not developed yet, there's some level of development in contrast to the Nigerian system. Some things are similar, though. There's the staff resistance to learning, to digital learning, and the likes. But in the Nigerian educational system, how do you? I don't know. I'm asking, how can you integrate this digital learning systems and practices into the Nigerian curriculum? It seems like it's already taken off at Kenya. So I'm wondering how we can bring it into Nigeria. Like, break that hold of teachers' resistance, balance up things, and I don't know if you get my question, ma'am.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so
Yes, I
before
do.
continue, I'm sorry for cutting you in, ma'am. There's
Mm.
Nigeria, we have public and private schools. I don't know if it also exists over there in Kenya. Public schools are owned by the government and private schools by private individuals. So these public schools, at least some of the public schools that are in urban areas, like you mentioned, are well funded. Some of them are well funded, and some of them have access to this digital learning tools and all of that. But there are some public schools also that are in the remote areas, in the rural areas, and they don't have access to these facilities. Also in the private sector too, the schools owned by private individuals. There are big private schools in Nigeria that whose the owners have they have the capacity to fund any digital tool they might need to on how to use these digital tools and the likes. But there are also private schools that do not have access to these facilities and cannot afford these facilities. And now we're talking about integrating digital learning systems and practices into the educational curriculum. So how do we go about this, especially in Nigeria, where many of the digital advancements have not taken foot in our schools? That's the question now. I hope you understood me, Madam Miriam.
Yes, yes. I have understood you.
Okay, now.
Yes, so as I mentioned before, we've also I can actually note a very tremendous a big change from let's say the year 2013 to now. It was also a big problem, just the same problem as you're talking about, like the private and the public schools. Yes, we also have private and public schools in Kenya. We have the public schools that are being owned by the government, and then we have the private schools that are being owned by individuals. And as also there are these public schools that are in urban and in rural areas. So it took personal initiatives. It took great leadership of these public schools in remote areas. Actually, these educators who are in charge of these schools in these remote areas, they're the ones who began these campaigns. It did not just, it's not something that happened overnight. They began these campaigns because it was something that could be noted even with someone who is not in Kenya, someone who is outside. Let's say, for example, if you visit in Kenya as a country during that time, you could go, you could pass by a school in the village. Someone tells you this is a school, and then when you go some let's say meters or kilometers into the urban areas to come across another school, someone tells you this is a school. Then you could note the change. You could note the change even just from the facilities, the facility, the classrooms themselves, leave alone even not going inside, just the buildings, the infrastructure of the buildings and all that. It could be deeply noted. So the communities are the ones that came together first. That is the educators in these schools and the parents to these students in these schools. They came together and they voiced out their concerns. We have local leaders in the areas, let's say, for example, the members of parliament, let's say, for example, the county assembly members and such. So they started voicing their problems through such initiatives, and people were mobilized together, and they could actually say that they needed a change of education because they were voicing their concerns regarding equality in education. So once they voiced these things with regular meetings and all that, people started taking notes. People who are in charge of education, even the ministry at large, started being curious and started noting what is being said, and they actually started putting up initiatives or platforms to address these problems. It's not something that happened overnight, but it needs at least someone to start it over. It needs the educators to be concerned. Even if you are in that school, in a public school, you are employed by the government. Here in Kenya, teachers teaching in public schools are employed by the government. So there are these teachers who are supposed to work as a bridge between the learners in the institutions, the parents in that village, and the government at large. Lucky enough, here we have the steps that you can follow. if you air your views at the lowest level, let's say for example the sub-county education level, and no one listens to you, you go to the county. From the county you go to until you reach the national government, and it is allowed. But if people don't talk, if you keep quiet, if you don't air your voices, if people don't say this is the problem, and it's something that should be done by the people who are on the ground, not someone who is coming from outside, because someone coming from outside cannot know the problems that you who is in that school is facing as an educator, or that learner who is in that school is facing as an educator, then the problem will not be solved. They went to an extent of even bringing newsmen and covering these stories in newspapers and such, and the dilapidating conditions of these schools and the kind of education that these learners were receiving and all that. And yet these learners had the potential, they had the brains, just as the learners in the urban schools. So they did this over a period of time until people started taking interest, people started taking notice, and then things gradually started changing. So I don't know if that could be helpful where you are, if you as educators, if we could have people voicing, and if we could have, they used to train the younger journalists to cover some of these stories in the even local radio stations and local TV stations. They walk to these schools, they interview the learners, they interview the teachers, they walk around the schools and see how the conditions were and such. Then they took all this information, put it out in the public. The country itself, the government itself could be embarrassed by such kind of things, and then they brought people on the ground to start working a way out. Yeah, thank you
very much, Madam Miriam. Thank you so much, ma'am. I also wonder why sometimes some of these stories that talk about the need for educational development and growth don't always trend like other stories in the newspaper. I hope we begin to work on this very soon. Okay, before I continue, do we still have any questions? Does anybody have a question? Please raise your hand before we move on. If there's any question, please, or an addition, or okay, you can go ahead, sir, Mr. Olamide.
I believe Miss Comfort, check the chat.
So there's an echo from your end.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah. So I said you can check the chat box. I believe Ms. Comfort has a question, so you can go through it.
Oh, okay, the chat box. I'll check it now. Okay, Ms. Comfort is saying, okay, here is my question. What practices can be adopted to promote cultural diversity in digital learning education? Madam Miriam, if you're still with us, the question says, what practices can be adopted to promote cultural diversity in digital learning education? Can you address that, please, ma'am? Okay, Ms. Comfort raised that, so she can explain herself.
Okay, sorry, I actually wanted to type digital language education.
Okay,
Did you hear me? Yes. What practices can be adopted to promote cultural diversity in digital language education, not learning, actually?
Okay,
Yes, sure. This one can be achieved actually, now that I am an advocate of cultural diversity, and especially now that we would want to really maintain an African identity as Africans and not allow it to be washed away by any other culture that is coming in, as far as civilization and education is concerned. So I think such practices as, you see, I am sure that in your country, that is Nigeria, you may have these practices, like let's say, for example, the music festivals, the drama festivals that are done specifically in your own language. Maybe let's say the Yoruba language or the Igbo language in Nigeria, and we may have another one from Uganda being done, maybe let's say in the Buganda language itself, and some from my country here in Kenya. So these are languages that are indigenous or are native in nature, and these are cultural practices that are being performed in these different music or drama festivals. So if we could, whenever these things are happening, these are captured and maybe they are uploaded, maybe let's say on YouTube or these social media platforms, and or any educational platform that exists, and we as educators could use this while teaching in classrooms. Let's say, for example, we want to really see how the Yoruba language cultural practices in that particular piece of music or piece of drama. And then we have maybe, let's say, even translators who can translate those that language into the English language so that the other students can understand. So as much as, yes, they are learning the English language through that digital platform, they are also connecting to these cultures that are diverse in the African continent in general. So they'll be cracking two puzzles at once. That is using the digital materials for learning, and at the same time also connecting to the diverse cultures that are around the world. Not only connecting them to the individual cultures or the individual content that you have around your own country, but doing this from different areas. I love the way that in Kenya they also, when it comes to these music or drama festivals, they encourage learners through the YouTube learning to learn other cultures, other even languages if possible, and then they bring this to the stages themselves. Like they learn something like the Indian dances, they learn I saw somewhere they were practicing Zimbabwean dance or something. They bring them on board. So this kind of cultural diversity learning through digital platforms such as the YouTube, social media platforms, and educational platforms that are digital in nature can actually be able to bring this kind of diversity that we all really admire for the African continent.
Thank you very much, Madam Miriam. Mrs. Comforts, was your question answered, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Thank you very
Okay.
much, ma'am. Okay. Is there any other addition from anyone, please? Okay. Mr. Lamle, you can go ahead, please.
Okay, so thank you so much, Madam Miriam, and brilliant presentation from you. A quick one. I just want to ask, how culturally diverse is Kenya? And is there a bit of any intercultural struggle? Like maybe, for instance, why I ask is because here in Nigeria, the reception towards digital inclination and all that, it's warmly received in the southern part and the east, and we still struggle a bit in the northern part. So, do we have similar case of such in Kenya?
Thank you for that question. Yes, in Kenya, we have very many ethnic groups. Well, the cultures are diverse, even within the country itself. We have the country divided into the northern, western, eastern, southern parts. And every part of the country, they have their own different cultural practices and traditions that they observe. And yes, many a times we find that there are other cultures that are more resistant as much as embracing digital literacy is concerned as compared to others. So in Kenya, specifically, I can say that in the central part of Kenya and in the northern part, in the central and the western part of Kenya, it is much more well embraced as compared to the other parts of the country. I cannot really tell the reason behind this or why it is so, but you find actually it is maybe because of their cultural practices. You find out that some very I don't want to use the word old. I don't know which word is more appropriate. If I say like conservative, yeah, I think conservative is more friendly. There are people who are conservatives in nature. They are so much they conserve so much their traditions and are not open to change. They don't want to be open to change, and they deem even things like these laptops and smartphones and all that to be evil, and they think that this one is going to sell out their children to the white ways and immoral activities, because someone imagines a smartphone is equal to exposure to pornography materials. Someone imagines that these social media platforms like the WhatsApp or let's say TikTok or such are just out to expose their children to more evil than good. So they become more conservative. They conserve their culture so much that even if you tell these learners, use your parents' smartphone to access this and this and that, when they get there, they say no. Phones are out of bound for children and such kind of thing. So they are not open. They are not open-minded. It is something that has also been encountered here. But what is done majorly is just to try as much as possible to educate these parents, and also without educating them, making their learners make a progress using these tools, a progress that they themselves can actually notice, so that it opens up their minds to be more accommodative.
Thanks, Madam Miriam. We won't be able to take any more questions because of our time. Thank you for handling this session brilliantly. We're grateful to have you with us. And on this note, I want to say we've come to the end of this week's ELTBD. So for those who are joining us for the first time, ELTBD is short for Everything Literature Theme-Based Discussion. We have it every Wednesdays by 7 p.m. and I host the session every Wednesdays. My name is Precious Olawole. You can also check out further content of Everything Literature Limited on our social media website. You can also connect with Madam Miriam on LinkedIn at Miriam Achiso and check out her materials on ubuntu.hub. I think, yes, ubuntu.hub at Miriam Achiso as well. Please do well to connect with her and also check out more insightful educational content at www.everythingliterature.ng. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining tonight's discussion. I'm sure your time wasn't wasted and it was worth your while. Thank you so much for joining. Have a lovely night rest, everyone. Thank you, Madam Miriam. We are grateful that you heard us today and you spoke with us. Thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge. We are grateful to have you here. Have a lovely night rest, everyone.